settle in.
Like while researching you, I think one of the things I found really, really interesting is, sort of fitting into New Zealand society, or especially after 9/11, because you said that after 9/11 happened, everyone sort of thought of you as that terrorist coming from that region, therefore that makes you sort of a terrorist. I think how you responded from what the interviews you've done before was really, really interesting. Could you sort of elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So I felt like overnight my life changed after 9/11. Before that, I felt, I fit in. I was fine with my peers. No one really, well, obviously I looked different, but no one really cared. But after 9/11, my peers started treating me really differently, started pointing out that I looked so different, questioning where I was from, and calling me a terrorist, making ridiculous jokes like that, which were really hurtful. Hurtful just because they're nasty things to say, but more hurtful to me in particular because I prided myself on the fact that my family were from a long line of human rights activists, and that my family had always fought dictator regimes and terrorists, and now as a victim of terrorism, to be conflated with a terrorist was particularly hurtful. To be honest, at that age, I struggled a lot with my identity. I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened, and it was hard enough to understand why I was born stateless and as a refugee, let alone trying to explain that to my peers. And I felt like no one would listen.
So understood like where you're coming from.
Exactly. So it was really hard to explain where I was from, because the minute you start explaining where Kurdistan is, people would be like, oh, Kurdistan, Afghanistan, those are all the terrorist places, all the places with stans. And then you'd start trying to explain where it is, and you'd have to say, oh, it's near Iraq, Iran, Turkey and Syria. And they're like, Iraq, Iran, all of a sudden these names that have been in the media as places where terrorists are from. And so it was really tough as a kid to try explain that. And so I dealt with it the only way I knew how, by completely denying it. So I went the opposite direction and denied completely about being from somewhere different. I tried to fit in and be as Kiwi as possible. I made up that I had never ever lived anywhere else, that I was born in New Zealand, that I had never been to any other countries or spoke any other languages. I even went to the extent of telling my parents to pick me up a little bit further away from school because I didn't want anyone to hear us speaking a different language. So I just wanted to fit in. And inevitably people would say, well, yeah, you have a really Kiwi accent, but you don't look Kiwi. The question that is so loaded, where are you actually
Really
from?
Yeah.
That question that to this day haunts me. And I would just say guess. And whatever they came up with, I'd be like, oh my God, how did you guess? Yeah, that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
So I had ridiculous, places that I would just say yes to. Think places that were completely different to where I'm really from. Places like Brazil, Arab, Persian, Greek, Macedonian, Maori, Indian, literally anything that they thought of, I'd be like, yeah, that's where I'm from. And I guess it was just a way to deal with it and not wanting to be different.
Yeah. I guess it was similar for me. My mom used to wear a headscarf.
Yeah.
And, when I was in primary or even in intermediate, I used to tell her to, because we used to live near the school, I used to tell her to pick me up about 200 meters away from my school because I don't want to be that different dude. Everyone, when your mum walks in and she's wearing a headscarf, everyone's like, oh, that guy, headscarves are from where Muslims are.
Yeah.
Muslims are terrorists.
Yeah.
And you just didn't want to be associated with that, because I know my family, sort of similar to yours, had to flee the terrorists there because they were also persecuted. And to be compared to that, it's you just don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it's such a hard thing, really.
It is, and especially at a young age, how do you get people to understand that, hey, no, I'm not the bad guy here. My people suffered at the hands of these people. How can you now compare me to them? But it's really difficult to explain. I totally agree where you come from. I mean, my parents looked identifiably different. They look foreign, and they had broken English, so as soon as they'd come near the school, I'd really embarrass. What if people talk to them and they realise that we're not from New Zealand?
Yeah. How did you actually deal with the bullies? because it's like, I think many people that are going through high school, a lot of them do sort of suffer through this, like bullies. Maybe it's for different reasons, but a lot of them are going home, you know, looking in the mirror and like, you know, what makes me different for people to treat me different. And I think it's really hard because, like, you know, even my peers and teens, like, we all get that cockiness vibe where we think we're better than other people, and we sort of throw shade or anything. How did you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, so I think it's difficult because ironically I was like in the popular group and one of the cool kids at school, yet I was being bullied by the same people that were in my crowd. So I almost feel like I made it harder for myself because I was more noticeable. And at some points at school, I would feel like maybe if I kept my head down and wasn't, you know, involved, then no one would notice me and no one would bully me. But when you've put yourself out into, like, you know, onto the stage, essentially, like if you're doing leadership activities, if you're participating in sports and events, then you're more noticeable. And so I always had this conflict being like, well, I want to participate in these things, like I enjoy them, but they're also making me more noticeable, and therefore I'm becoming more of a target. If I just kept my head down, if no one knew me, then I would just be hanging out, you know, at the back of some building at lunchtimes with a couple of friends, and no one would ever notice me and no one would bully me. So I constantly thought about, you know, should I just completely step out of the activities I'm doing and, you know, hide away essentially. But I couldn't because I enjoyed the things I was doing. So I remember finding it really tough because the same people that were supposed to be my friends were the main perpetrators of these, you know, racist and horrible treatment. So I don't know, sometimes I felt like I just laughed and went along with it. And now looking back, I feel like that's what a lot of people did. I imagine that a lot of people in those instances, like there probably were one of two people that were the key bullies, but everyone else just wanted almost, you know, like some sort of confirmation from their friends that they were also doing the right thing. So you just tag along and you laugh, you make jokes because you think that's what what everyone wants you to do, and it's just peer pressure. And so I didn't deal with it very well. I would act very strong in front of it and act like it didn't faze me. I would pretend to my parents and family and friends that I was fine. I never indicated it in that kind of place, but internally I was suffering, and I was really upset about this bullying. But, you know, so I wouldn't say I dealt with it. I actually just suppressed it. That's how I got through it, which I definitely would not recommend. But as you grow up, you realize that the kind of people that also bully, I mean, there's on the one hand, the type of people that are suffering themselves. They're going through something either at home or with their own personal lives that then leads them to bully others, or they're just simply following what they think is cool or what they think they should be doing, even though they don't necessarily believe it. So there's, you know, those two types of bullies, I think.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It's like it's a big problem, especially like in secondary school. Like, I know I've been both the bully and the bullied. Yeah. I'm not proud that I've been bullied, but I think, like, you know, carrying from what you said, you often bully because you think it's the funny thing or the cool thing to do, which is, like, to be honest, anyone who's listening, and if you think that's the cool thing to do, it's like, that's just dumb. Yeah. Straight up.